Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillahi amma ba'd. Welcome to another episode of the Hard Matters Podcast. This is episode 7 of the Concise Advices by Sheikhul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimallahu ta'ala. And we are on the third means to remove the evil effects of sins, which is righteous actions. Shaykh al-Islam, rahimahullah, he said the third means to remove the consequences of sins is righteous deeds which expiate sins. Explanation by Shaykh Ruhaili Hafidullah. The Prophet ﷺ said, follow up an evil deed with a good deed and it will wipe it out. Righteous actions are an eraser. Some of the scholars call righteous actions purifiers, meaning by way of righteous actions, the person purifies himself from sin. Sheikh-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, like the expiation prescribed for the one who has intercourse during the day in Ramadan, or the one who divorces his wife by zihar, or the one who commits some actions which are forbidden during the pilgrimage, or one who fails to fulfill some of its obligations, or the one who hunts during the pilgrimage. Sheikh Ruhaili Hafidullah, he says, the prescribed expiation is the specified expiation, which is the consequence of an action. Whenever the action occurs, the expiation becomes mandatory. These expiations are ways to remove sins or shortcomings. It is hoped that the expiation will remove the consequences necessitated by the sin. Some of the ulama, the scholars, say that the expiation does not completely remove the sins consequences unless it is accompanied by tawbah. The correct statement from the scholars is that the expiation is a deterrent before the sin occurs, while it is restoration after the sin occurs. The expiation deters the people from committing the sin, but if the people commit the sin, then the expiation repairs the errors they committed. Let's stop here for a second. Now, the Sheikh is probably going to explain this, get into this in a little bit more. But what is being talked about here are the prescribed expiations for issues that are violated or obligations obligations that aren't fulfilled. So the first one that Sheikh al-Islam rahimahullah mentioned is the expiation for having sexual intercourse during the month of Ramadan. The ulama are stressing that the expiation is a deterrent before you do it, because the prescribed expiation is for doing that is you must free a slave. If you can't do that, then you have to fast for 60 days or for 2 months consecutively. That's the expiation. So that is not easy. Matter of fact, if you're doing the expiation fast and you break the fast one of those days for whatever reason, you have to start over. You have to start the 60 days over again. So this is what they're talking about. They're saying that it is a deterrent in itself. It is a deterrent to let people know, look, you don't want to do this, because if you do this, then these are the steps that you're going to have to take in order to get this sin off of your back. Now, back to Sheikh Ruhaili Hafidullah. He says, Sheikhul-Islam said, like the expiation prescribed for one who has sexual intercourse during the day in Ramadan. Sexual intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramadan is a major evil and a sin. If the person has sexual intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramadan, then the mandatory expiation for this is freeing a slave. If he does not have a slave to free, he must fast 2 consecutive months. If he's not able to do that, he must feed 60 poor people. If he does this, it will remove the evil consequences of the sin. Let's stop here again. You see, this is why the ulama say that this issue, the expiation for these issues, is a deterrent to keep the person from doing it in the first place. But if it is violated, then the expiation, it is hoped that the expiation will remove the consequences of the sin. Back to the sheikh. And he still must make up this day of fasting. The most correct statement from the scholars concerning this matter is that it is obligatory upon him to make up this day of fasting and perform the expiation. What are the effects of the expiation? The effect of the expiation is that it is a deterrent before the sin is committed. When the person knows that having sexual intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramadan will result in this major expiation, it will prevent him from having sexual intercourse during the daylight hours. The scholars have mentioned a noble, valuable principle. When the natural impediment is weak, the legislative impediment is stronger. And when the desire to commit an act is strong, the deterrent to commit the act is stronger. It is known that when a person is fasting, he is prohibited from having sexual relations during the daylight hours. The enticements and temptations become strong and the soul is weak if you want to speak truthfully about this matter. You will find a man during Ramadan who does not go near his wife the entire night. But when he starts fasting, the shaitan comes to him and the temptations come to him and he falls into the impermissible. From the strange questions I've been asked is when a man is in his 70s said to me, "O Sheikh, by Allah, for 10 years, I've not gone close to my wife. And this year during Ramadan, while I was fasting, I had sexual relations with her. This is because Iblis, Shaitan, is diligent and causing man to fall into this. Because of this, there is a difficult expiation as a deterrent for a man to keep him from falling into this sin. Let's stop here for a second. This is a soul, a foundation in Islam, that there are things that people, meaning people who want to make it seem like, and they're just making it seem like because they don't understand, just like Sheikh bin Baz said, oh, I don't understand this. Yeah, it's you don't understand it. It doesn't mean that it's not just and that it's not good. No, it's just that you don't understand it. And this is the asl of Islam, that there are deterrents. There are deterrents when an actual Islamic state exists. That's another talk. But when I'm saying when an actual Islamic state exists, the way it did during the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Khulafa Rashidin, there are deterrents. There are deterrents to keep people from doing despicable actions. This is what this is talking about. And this is the asl of the deen. This is not just for this matter of, breaking the fast, having sexual relations and stuff. No, it's an asl in the deen. It's a foundation. I'll give you an example. The punishment for an individual, and there are circumstances for an individual who steals in a sound, just Islamic state, just meaning that this particular punishment would be applied to everybody, not just to poor people, but to everybody. If the individual did it because he was hungry or he was trying to feed his family, then there are rules that the qadi, that the judge will take into account, and maybe he won't receive the prescribed punishment because of his circumstance, and he'll be legislated, or he'll be eligible to receive zakat, which is the mandatory charity that the rich Muslims must give to the poor Muslims. So if an individual situation is like that, where he's stealing because he can't find a job and he needs to feed his family, that's different. But if an individual is stealing because he's a thief, he's stealing because he wants to steal, there's a punishment. And the punishment is, if he's caught, or if he confesses, because there were people during the Prophet's time who confessed to these type of sins because they didn't want to deal with it in the next life. They wanted to deal with it in this life. But if he's caught, or if he confesses, then his hand is chopped off in public. It's not private. It's a public, he's brought out in the public so the people can see, oh, okay, this is what happens if you do this without justification, meaning because you just want to be a thief. You just want to rob people. Okay, all right, but this is what we got for you. It's done publicly. Why? It's a deterrent. People see that, they be like, they think a few times before they take that step. I would. I know I would. They think a few times before they take that step. because I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be him. No. Ala kulli halin. Back to the sheikh. After the person has committed the sin, the expedition is in place to remove the consequences of the sin. But as for the day in which he has sexual relations while fasting, this day of fasting must be made up. Let's stop again. Once the individual, I'm going back to the hand now, the man with the hand. Once he receives that punishment in this life, it is hoped that he will not be held accountable for that in the next life. You see? So it's a deterrent, and it is also a possible expiation for having to deal with it when you meet Allah on the other side. Now, the Sheikh Hafidullah continues. Sheikhul-Islam said, or the one who divorces his wife by telling her she is like his mother's back. This is something they used to do back during the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is if a man would say that to his wife, he would automatically be divorced from her. The expedition for this is freeing a slave and fasting 2 months consecutively, if he can't free a slave, or feeding 60 poor people if he can't fast 2 months consecutively. Sheikh-Islam Rahimahullah said, or the one who commits such actions which are forbidden during the pilgrimage. Why did he say some and not the one who commits actions which are forbidden during the pilgrimage? This is because there are some forbidden acts during the pilgrimage which do not carry a penalty or expediation. For example, marriage. There is no penalty for marrying while performing the pilgrimage. For this reason, he said, some actions which are forbidden. The penalty for the person who shaves his head while in the state of ihram, or the one who removes some of his hair while in ihram, is that they have the choice to either sacrifice an animal, feed 60 poor people, or fast 3 days. Sheikh al-Islam said, or one who fails to fulfill some of the obligations, meaning, likewise, the one who abandons some obligations of Hajj should offer expiation, because the person who leaves off some obligations of Hajj must offer a sacrifice. This is a subtle issue of jurisprudence here. Does the sacrifice offered by the person who leaves off some of the obligations of pilgrimage take the place of those obligations? Or is the sacrifice to remove the effect of leaving off some obligations? Is this affair from the trivial matters of knowledge? No. Rather, this has a great effect on the rulings of pilgrimage. Now, Sheikh-Islam said, these expeditions are of 4 types: offering a sacrifice, freeing a slave, giving in charity, and fasting. The sacrifice mentioned here is not the same sacrifice offered by those performing the pilgrimage. As for the charity, does this include zakat? No, it does not. Why? Because we are speaking about expediation. And expediation involves charity, which is separate from zakat. Some of those who explain this treatise by the Sheikh, they err by saying that this charity includes zakat and not optional charity. We say the intent here is not zakat or optional charity. The intent here is charity which became obligatory due to a specific action, such as feeding 60 poor people, for the person who shaves his head while in the state of ihram. It's not an optional charity. You must do it in order to expedite for that particular sin. Now, the Sheikh continues. Similarly, the fasting mentioned as expiation does not include the obligatory fast of Ramadan. And it does not include the optional fast, like on Mondays and Thursdays. The intent is that Allah has obligated the person who does specific actions to fast as expiation for those actions. For example, the person who has sexual intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramadan must fast for 2 consecutive months if he or she cannot free a slave. Sheikhul-Islam Rahimahullah says, regarding the kinds of expiation that are unrestricted, as Hudhayfa said to Omar, radiallahu anhuma, the fitna faced by a man because of his family, wealth, and children may be expedited by prayer, fasting, charity, and enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. Sheikh Ruhaili Hafidhullah, he said, the unrestricted expiation here means righteous actions. Righteous actions are expiations for sins, as we have mentioned. Righteous actions are called purifiers. The hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu mentioned the dispute of the angels who sit on lofty stations. It is a tremendous hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah spoke to him in a dream and said, "O Muhammad, do you know what the chiefs on high are disputing about?" Meaning the angels. They dispute about the things which expedite sins. The things which expedite sins are staying in the masjid after the prayer, walking on foot to the congregational prayers, and performing wudu properly when it is difficult to do so. Whoever does these things will live upon good, and he will die a good death, and he will be as free from sin as on the day his mother bore him. End of the hadith. Sheikh Ruhaili Hafidhullah says, what are the chiefs on high disputing about? They dispute about the things which expedite sins. This hadith explains those actions which expedite sins. He said, staying in the masjid after the prayer, walking to the congregational prayers, performing wudu properly when it is difficult. Whoever does these things will live upon good. This means those who perform these good deeds. How much good has passed us by? Who from amongst us is diligent in remaining in the masjid? SubhanAllah. When the Imam says the salam to exit the prayer, it is as though the people were sitting on hot coals. The good one is the person who at least remains sitting to remember Allah Ta'ala, and even he will rush in his remembrance and then walk away. Of course, sometimes a person will have some business to attend to, so he must leave. But for most of us today, it has become such that we do not sit in the masjid except on rare occasions. Remaining in the masjid is from the righteous actions. The person who remains in the masjid is promised that he will live upon good. And it is also from the reasons for having a good ending, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and he will die a good death. Likewise, walking on foot to the congregational prayers and performing wudu properly when it is difficult. The proof that righteous deeds expedite sins is that the text of this hadith calls righteous actions the expediation of sins. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, Hudhayfa said to Omar, the fitna faced by a man because of his family, wealth, and children may be expedited by prayer, fasting, charity, and enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. In another narration, he mentioned the fitna faced by a man from himself, his children, and his neighbor. The fitna faced by a man because of his family, wealth, and children. What is the fitna of a man concerning his family, wealth, and children? The scholars said it is what he is exposed to by entertaining them, or the minor sins he does for them. The scholars have said that a man may be tested in his children, he may be tested by his children, or he may be tested from his children. He may be tested by his children, so he plays with them, and he may miss some of his obligations because of them. How many people ever never took a picture until he had a child? And now he carries around a picture of his child on his phone. They're good people who have refused to take a picture since they have known the truth, except those pictures which are necessities. But once he has a child, he photographs his children. He has been tested by his children. He may be tested in his children. By his children being upon an evil path or having bad manners, and refuge is sought with Allah. He may be tested from his children by the child calling the parent to evil. How many men were upon guidance, the sunnah, and he actualized uprightness, but when he had a child, his child keeps at him until he distorts the parent and turns him away from it. As for the man being tested by his neighbor, as appears in the other narration, the ulama said that this is what occurs due to envy or from infringing on their rights, like with the driveway, for example. This is a fitna of a man regarding his neighbor. Righteous actions expedite these fitna, such as the prayer, fasting, enjoining the good, and forbidding the evil. The scholars have agreed that righteous actions expedite the minor sins, but do righteous actions expedite major sins. We will give an illustration so you will know the implications of this matter. Does a Muslim pray or not? He prays. The greatest righteous action after Tawheed is the Salah. And we will stop here, inshallah ta'ala, and we will come back because this is going to take a minute, and we will come back and pick up on. We will give an illustration so you will know the implications of this matter. We will come back in episode 8 and we will deal with this matter bi'idhnillahi ta'ala.